Hi there. Thanks for joining me. I wanted to talk today about something called encouraging positive thinking or fighting negative thoughts. In our groups that we run here at Camray with our early years parent support program, we often talk about negative thoughts. We often talk about getting rid of those negative thoughts, but sometimes we forget to go into a little bit more detail about what we mean by that and how to do it. So we just put together a quick recorded video here for our families where they can learn more information about how to do it. Um, this whole concept of negative thoughts and automatic negative thoughts that we're going to be going into in a minute is based in cognitive behavioral therapy. So if you'd like to learn more about it, you can definitely do your own research or look into CBT or look into ANTS, and you can grab more information. But also your workers here at Camray are more than happy to help go into some of this material with you. I'll be giving you a few examples today, but there's a lot of them. And I could turn this into a 10-hour group. So I'm going to try to go as briefly as possible and then leave it for you to maybe consult with your counselor or a parent support worker or whoever you have in your life that could maybe help you look into it a little bit further if you're interested. The first thing I like to ask families and parents is, how do you think children learn to think negatively? Sometimes we run groups like this and I have families come up to me and say, this was a great group, but I don't really understand what this has to do with parenting. And so I forget often to mention the most important piece is that when we work with parents, we work on some of their own issues and some of their own problematic behaviors or thoughts, because children learn through modeling. They copy their parents, they learn what their parents do. And so if they're sitting there constantly hearing mom, dad, other primary caregivers thinking negatively and speaking negatively, they will inherit that. They will start to think that way and speak that way. So we want to change those behaviors and thoughts in parents so that their children can learn to do better as well. So what are automatic negative thoughts? And the short phrase for them is called ANTS. And so you might hear about ants or ant species, and those are automatic negative thoughts. So those are the thoughts that come to us really quickly. And most of us have it as sort of a learned thing. And so, I don't think every child is born with these negative thoughts. I think our life experiences shape us. I think modeling shapes us. We learn from our own parents, teachers, caregivers, whoever's in our lives. And so there's 10 of sort of the most common ants that we see in people, and these are the ones that we try to work on the most. The first is all or nothing thinking. Thoughts are either all good or all bad, right? I'm a bad person. There's no room for I'm a good person who made a few bad decisions or who did a few bad things. It's very black and white thinking. Always thinking. So this negative thought is using terms like always, never, no one, everyone, every time, everything. So no one likes me. No one. I have no friends, right? And so obviously it's not true that no one likes you and you have no friends. Well, let's hope that's not true. Most of the time it's not. So it's that generalization of it's always, never, no one. um, Focusing only on the negative, only seeing the bad in a situation. I remember a really long time ago, I was working with another counselor, and they had such a great technique of saying, I want you to look around the room, and you can do this right now if you want to. I'll try to give a little bit of space and time for it. And they said, I want you to look around the room, and I want you to notice everything that's green. And so I sat there and I looked around the room and I noted everything that was green. And they're like, try to remember it as best you can, repeat it if you need to. And they gave me about 30 seconds, a minute to do it. And they said, close your eyes. And I said, great. Close your eyes, and I want you to tell me everything in the room that's brown. And of course, my mind went blank. And whether you do it now or you can pause the video or do it at the end, try the exercise, because I know for me, I could not remember a single thing that was brown because I was so focused on trying to remember the green. And they use that as an example of focusing on the negatives. So whenever we tell ourselves a narrative, or we think back to our life story, or we think back just to the day's events, if we're already trapped in that negativity bubble, we're more likely to remember all the negative things that prove our point that we had a bad day. Versus if we tell ourselves we had an okay day or a good day, even, we're more likely to remember all the good things that happened. Another one is fortune telling, predicting the worst possible outcome of a situation and just assuming that will happen. I was recently on an airplane, and my husband always makes fun of me whenever we travel because I think of every worst outcome that could possibly happen. Oh, we won't get into the country. Oh, we'll forget this. What if we forget the passports? What if I don't pack this? What if I don't pack that? And he just thinks it's hilarious because he travels a lot for work, so he's used to just grabbing a backpack, putting a few things in it, and going and making do. We had two little kids with us too, though, so of course my mom brain went on. But I think my partner and I, we balance each other out really well, because his whole thing is, he thinks everything will smooth out and work out no problem. He's like, I got my passport, I got my wallet, I think we can manage. And so for me, I go straight to the worst possible outcome for some reason every time when I travel. And that's sort of fortune telling and predicting and assuming the worst thing's going to happen, or that you can't get out of a situation if something bad does happen. Mind reading is believing that you know what another person is thinking, even though they haven't told you. I get it. We can look at people's facial expressions, body language, and we can assume, and we may be right. But here with the mind reading piece, it's just catching yourself in doing it and saying, I don't actually know what that other person's thinking. I can't tell you how many times I personally have assumed that someone was judging me, only to find out later that they were actually thinking something really nice. I remember sitting around and there was another woman looking at me, and I was like, oh, she's being super judgy. And then she actually came up to me afterwards and said, oh my gosh, I just love your outfit. I've been staring at you all day, and I couldn't wait to come over and tell you that I just love what you're wearing. And I was thinking, oh, I just assumed she was looking at me thinking negative things, when in fact she was thinking something quite kind. Thinking with your feelings, believing negative feelings without ever questioning them. So yeah, I think we all are guilty of doing that sometimes. There's one called guilt beatings, thinking in words like should, must, ought, have to. I have to do it this way. I should do it this way. I remember working with another therapist who always used to say, oh, you're shoulding all over yourself. And I used to have a good giggle about that. And I remind myself when I was doing those guilt beatings, I grew up in a very Italian culture, and there's I know lots of cultures are like this, but there's a lot of customs and traditions and ways that you should be doing things, and it's not seen as positive if you try to sort of veer off and do it your own way. I'm thinking of even having a wedding, and I remember I did a lot of things outside of the box that I was like, I don't really care if I have a wedding in a church, or I don't care if this or that. And it was really hard for my family, because they're like, no, you have to do it this way, it should be this way. So for me personally, I wasn't giving myself that guilt beating, but I think my family, my mom especially, was giving herself some of those of like, I'm not a good mom because she should be doing it this way. So I think whenever you hear yourself using those words in your negative thoughts of like, I have to do it this way, it should be this way, ask yourself why does it need to be that way? And oftentimes when we really stop and think about the why, we realize, oh, it doesn't actually matter if it's done that way. Labeling is attaching a negative label to yourself or someone else. Blaming someone else for the problems that you have. Blaming comes with that sense of victimization, right? It's not that internal locus of control. It's saying the control is outside of me, and it's someone else's fault for the problems that I'm having. And that victim mentality is really, really unhealthy and causes us to feel negatively about ourselves. And the last one is personalization. Harmless events are seen as personal in nature. I have a few people in my life that I know that are like this, and they're really, really difficult to be around because everything revolves around them. And so even the littlest of behaviors, like if I say no to that person, no, I can't help you. And they're like, well, what, you don't like me? Did I do something to offend you? And I'm like, no, I'm really busy and I have to do this other thing. So it's really hard to be boundaried around people like that. So this one is easy to notice because you're seeing other people's actions as always being about you versus it being about them. I don't think it's in the slide, so I want to take a moment to mention, why are we looking at these negative thoughts? Other than the obvious of it being really negative all the time and not wanting to pass that on to our children, what we know with these is that when we look at clients and people with depression, they tend to have a lot of these negative thoughts. And so we want to catch them, because the more that we can change them, the more likely we're going to get into positive thinking. We're at really high risk for depression when we're thinking like this all the time, or we may already be in a depression. So if I've read out these 10 automatic negative thoughts and you're thinking, wow, I do this a lot of the time, you may want to think about talking to someone, talking to a family doctor or a therapist or your parent support worker about what the next steps might be, and maybe looking at if there's a possible depression going on. So getting back to the ants, how do we crush them? How do we get rid of them? So it's sort of a 4-step process. We want to think about the negative event that you've experienced in the past little while. You want to try to remember why you were upset, angry, frustrated, and try to identify some of the negative thoughts you were having. And then you want to identify the actual ant. What is the negative thought? Does it fall into one of those categories? Does it fall into multiple categories? And then we want to try to create a new positive thought that you could replace the negative thought with. Now, this is happening after the event. And the reason we're doing this is if we're calling them automatic negative thoughts, they automatically happen. So what I find most of the time with people is that we need to work on past events before the new positive thinking becomes the norm, becomes the thing that automatically comes into our mind. Some of us are just naturally more negative thinkers. I know I fall into that category. And so often in the moment, I'm not thinking the positive thought, but I'm able now to come to the positive thought a lot quicker, or sometimes it's seconds after I have the negative thought and I think, nope, that wasn't a good one. That wasn't fair. I wasn't being kind to myself. So the more that you do this, the more practice you get, the more likely you're able to translate it into a positive thought. So an example here, we're going to take a negative event because it's just me here. I'm going to use my own example. The other day, my kids had a complete meltdown. We had a family barbecue with my brother and his wife and kids, and my sister and her husband and kids, and my mom and my dad. It was lovely. My kids were just exhausted and they needed to go to bed. And it was one of those, like, you can tell how tired they are and they were asking to go home. I needed to work. So my husband said, I'm going to take them home and and put the kids to bed, and you can stay at your parents' house and get some work done so that you're not having to deal with the kids. Well, that caused 2 very large, intense meltdowns. They were already exhausted. They had a wonderful day. They obviously didn't want to leave, even though they were tired. But the big thing for both my kids that came out was they burst into tears and said, no, Mama has to read us our stories and put us to bed. And the meltdown was like, they were screaming, like the whole neighborhood could hear them. And it went from this really positive, fun barbecue to just drama and meltdown. And I remember in the moment wanting to cry. I felt guilty for not wanting to put my kids to bed for one night in the past 5 years. And I felt guilty about kind of ruining the mood. It was a positive vibe up until then. But more than anything, I had a moment of thinking, I'm a bad mom. I'm a bad mom because I don't go out of my way to get my husband to put the kids to bed so that becomes normal for them, or get anyone else other than me to put them to bed. So then when I do finally need a break, I can't get it because they're just not used to it. I had a million and one reasons in my head, but the big one was I'm a bad mom. I'm a bad mom, and it's obvious to everyone sitting outside here. So I went back and looked at the ant species, because really in the moment I was like, what is this? And I think it came down to the all or nothing thinking. It's okay to be a good mom who makes bad decisions, or a good mom caught in a bad circumstance through COVID and pandemics and lockdowns, through, my kids are 20 months apart, and I took lots of mat leaves. And so I've been home with my kids all their lives. They have not had a lot of time away from me. And a lot of it was outside of my own control. And so when I stepped back and thought about it, I was like, I'm not a bad mom. I'm just, there's been some really rough circumstances, and I'm a great mom who's made the best of the conditions that I have. And so when I stopped and tried to replace it with a positive thought, I tried to relook at the situation. As embarrassed as I was and as guilty as I felt, I kept thinking, the silver lining here is my kids love me so much that they got that upset at the idea of someone else having to put them to bed. And, you know, is it my proudest moment? No, but there's definitely a few thoughts and positive ideas that I could replace the negative one with. And in fact, the more I started looking at different positive thoughts to replace it with, the more I realized how ridiculous the concept of I'm a bad mom is. Um, but I use this example because if there are other moms watching, I think all of us have been there where we leap very quickly to I'm a bad mom. It must cross my mind at least once a day. And so to me, this is the negative thought and the ant species that I am most battling with. And it still comes no matter how many times I try to fight it. And so for me, it's about stopping, thinking, and trying to reframe it with a positive thought. Positive language. So with these new thoughts, it's important to pair it out loud with positive language as well. This will reaffirm it in you and help those around you learn to think more positively as well. So if I'm processing this with my children around, I will try to think out loud so that they learn from that behavior, that maybe my initial reaction was to break down and cry or to say I'm a bad mom. Sometimes I in the moment will kind of unload on my husband and go off, and I'm forgetting that they can in fact hear me and listen. And so at least going and repairing the situation by replacing it with the positive thoughts and using positive language is helpful for them to learn as well. Neural pathways. Although this process can seem simple, it requires a lot of awareness, effort, and multiple repetitions before it becomes a natural thought and reaction. An example that I think we read in a book, but that a lot of other counselors use is it's kind of like sledding down a path, you know. So if you go down, if there's been a big snowfall and you're the first person to go down a hill with a sled, creating that new path can be very resistant. But the more you sled down the path, the more smooth it becomes and the more natural it becomes. And so that natural path at the beginning might be to have a negative thought, like the all or nothing thinking. But what we're trying to do is create a new path and then use that path over and over and over again so that eventually your brain says, ooh, this is the smoothest, easiest path to use. And then now that the automatic thought that starts to come up is more positive. And I can say I've been practicing this for, gosh, a good 20 years now with some of these. And not the mom stuff, but the other stuff. And I can say that, you know, I feel like I'm living proof that the more you practice, the more positive thinking will come into your brain, and it'll come easier. So it won't feel like such an uphill battle. Benefits. I just wanted to stop and make sure that people can think about what the benefits would be to a young child. And I feel like I've touched on it already, but it's you know, really thinking about how does this benefit me as a parent and how does this benefit my child? This can create happier homes, less depression. It's sort of endless, you know. When we start thinking more positively, you'll notice the energy shift in your home, that there's less tension, less anxiety, less anger, because we're taking the same situations and using them to think more positively and using them to see the brighter side of things. So you know, it sounds kind of corny, but I think the benefits are really endless of using some of this work. If you have any follow-up questions or you want to learn more about this topic or anything else parenting related, you can email our admin desk at admin@camray.ca. You can also email my program directly, the Early Years Parent Support Program, which is for parents who live in Burnaby or New West and have at least one child under 6, or parents who are expecting. You can email us directly at pspgroupsignup@camray.ca. You can also call our admin desk at 604-436-9449, or you can check out our website at www.camray.ca for more videos or more information on our programs. Thanks again for joining me.